My name is Christopher Allen Maloney, and this is Why This Movie, a podcast where we talk about the movies we love and why we love them. Today I'm talking to my friend and film fanatic and YouTube pioneer, Jonathan Paula. The moment when I knew that your obsession with film was at least as intense as mine, you'll probably know what I'm going to say. It was when we were working together for the same company. We were sitting in the same office, and somebody, I think I mentioned the movie, the Albert Brooks movie, Defending Your Life, which is severely underrated in my opinion.
Not a particularly popular or well-known film, certainly amongst our cohorts. Like this is a film that, you know, Gen X and boomers might know, but people under 40 have not seen this film.
Yeah.
It's not one that's been passed down through the years.
And then you mentioned how much you enjoyed it too, and then said, you know, I really enjoy the music from that movie. And then I began humming the main theme.
Yes. Michael Gore did that. Came out in March of 1991, which means it's coming up on 24 years old, which is crazy.
34.
That's what I meant.
All right, so you said how much you liked the music. I started humming it, and you just sat there and let me make my point. And
Yes.
and then after that, you said there are probably two people in the world who could hum that tune on command, and they both happen to work in this same office.
Yeah, I definitely, that sounds like a joke I would have made, and it sounds like something Dennis Miller would have said, which is what I was kind of referencing.
Was it a joke?
It was partly a joke, but there's definitely a good deal of truth to that statement. Like, yes, out of all of the millennials working in New Hampshire on that date, how many, if you had polled everyone across the entire state, how many could hum Michael Gore's Defending Your Life end suite on command? And I guarantee you the number is less than 10. And two of them were in the same cubicle, the same office that day. I think you're right. I think that is where our kinship was sort of codified, and that's where it began, which is really fun.
I don't even think Michael Gore could do it.
He's just like, yeah, that's one of the ones I didn't win a Grammy or anything for that. I don't remember.
Yeah.
Very true. Very true.
All right. So what movie are we talking about?
Well, my favorite movie is Back to the Future.
In 1985, Universal released a time travel comedy called Back to the Future. Produced by Steven Spielberg and directed by Robert Zemeckis, this film sees Marty McFly, played by Michael J. Fox, accidentally wind up in his hometown 30 years in the past.
Steven Spielberg presents Back to the Future, a Robert Zemeckis film. Marty leads an ordinary life.
No McFly ever amounted to anything in the history of Hill Valley. Well, history is going to change.
And 1985 is not his year. But Dr. Brown is about to change all that.
Are you telling me you built a time machine out of a DeLorean?
He's sending Marty 30 years back in time.
It works! It's a flying saucer from outer space!
Now, he's trapped in the past.
It's got to be a dream.
About to meet.
Before helping his friend, Dr. Emmett Brown, with an experiment that sends him back in time, Marty lives a life that isn't exactly inspired. Besides the bright spot of his girlfriend, his dad's a loser, his mom has let herself go, and he has no reason to believe in himself.
Hey, Marty. I'm at your answering service while you're outside pouting over the car. Jennifer Parker called you twice.
I don't like her, Marty. Any girl who calls up a boy is just asking for trouble.
Oh, Marty, there's nothing wrong with calling a boy.
I think it's terrible. Girls chasing boys. When I was your age, I never chased a boy or called a boy or sat in a parked car with a boy.
Then how am I supposed to ever meet anybody?
Well, it'll just happen. Like the way I met your father.
That was so stupid. Grandpa hit him with the car.
It was meant to be. Anyway, If Grandpa hadn't hit him, then none of you would have been born.
Yeah, well, still don't understand what Dad was doing in the middle of the street.
What was it, George? Bird watching?
What, Lorraine? What?
Once Marty lands in 1955 and gets in the way of fate by inadvertently interrupting the first time his parents meet, he has to make sure they meet and fall in love before he heads back to the future. Or else, he will cease to exist and there will be no future.
Okay, so now, you come up, you punch me in the stomach, I'm out for the count, right? And you and Lorraine live happily ever after.
Oh, you make it sound so easy. I wish I wasn't so scared.
George, there's nothing to be scared of. All it takes is a little self-confidence. You know, if you put your mind to it, you can accomplish anything.
Back to the Future opened to rave reviews and huge box office, becoming the highest-grossing film of 1985. It spawned 2 sequels and a spin-off cartoon, as well as a now-retired attraction at Universal Studios Resort in Orlando, Florida. Siskel and Ebert, in their televised review, gave Back to the Future 2 thumbs up.
What would you say, if you think about it, meeting your mother as a teenager? What would you feel if you saw your parents as young people? What a thrill that would be. And this film, rather than being helter-skelter action picture, which it could have been, holds on that moment. I credit the director, Bob Zemeckis, for having the sensitivity, the smarts, to make this something bigger than just a laugh-a-minute special effects picture. There's a real heart to this film. Back to the Future has all that emotion, a most clever and funny and interesting script written by Bob Zemeckis and his partner Bob Gale. And the writing here, I think, is really the star. This script couldn't have been ruined if it had been directed by the director who did Red Sonja. If it had starred the cast of Red Sonja. So I guess I've made my point. Back to the Future receives my highest recommendation as a film. Pretty good screenplay, and like all...
My parents took my sister and I to Universal Studios Orlando when we were like 9 or 10. And at the time, I had not seen any of the classics. So my parents, for some reason, took us to the park, spent thousands of dollars on this like 4-day vacation, and I got to ride Jaws and King Kong and the Back to the Future ride. And I loved the hell out of all of these experiences.
Nobody else grabs you, twists you, turns you, shakes you, rocks you, slimes you, hurls you, hugs you, loves you, and puts your whole family right in the middle of all the action and adventure you've seen on the screen. Not anyone. If you want to go on the greatest rides, based on the biggest movies, you've got to go to the world's biggest movie studio and Orlando's newest and greatest theme park. Universal Studios, Florida, the only place on earth where you can ride the movies.
But then when I got home, I was like, Dad, can we watch the movies that these rides are based on? Because they all seemed really fun. Because for some reason, I hadn't seen them yet. So in the space of like 2 weeks after we got back from Universal that summer, we went to West Coast Video in Lynn, Massachusetts, and we rented all of the classics, all the Spielberg canon from the 80s and 90s. And we watched Indiana Jones and Star Wars and Back to the Future and Jaws. And sort of that was the foundational week of my movie loving life. And ever since, those have been my favorites. And they've kind of jockeyed back and forth in terms of which one is my number one favorite. But as I matured and got older, I kind of drifted away from certain fandoms and gravitated towards others. And Back to the Future is the one that kind of stands atop the rest as the one I keep coming back to, the one I obsess over, the one I go out of my way to collect memorabilia for. I recently went to Rhode Island Comic Con this past November and got to meet, finally, for the first time, Michael J. Fox in person. And I still love it. I come back to it every year. I watch it every November 12th, which is a fun red letter date in the history of that franchise and that film and that universe. So I try to watch it every November, and it's great. I adore it.
Yeah, I didn't know that about you kind of getting introduced to all these great movies through riding them first.
Yeah.
When I went to Universal Studios when I was a kid, I knew all those movies really well.
I definitely went on the ride before seeing the film. And the idea of time travel, the idea of like a zany mad scientist that kind of goes on crazy adventures and gets caught up in his own messes, that was, to a 10-year-old, that was, a very attractive and interesting concept that I'm like, I need to know more about this Doc Brown fella.
So what was it that stood out to you when you first saw it?
I think besides all of the wonderful, script and dialogue from producer and writer Bob Gale, all of the wonderful character work. I think what stood out to me initially was the what if of everything. The sci-fi aspect, I think, was the most attractive and the most intriguing. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, if you could build a time machine and you could build it out of a car, then that opens up my imagination and my possibilities as a 10-year-old thinking, okay, if I had a car that could go anywhere in time, where would I take it? How would I get out of these situations? And I'm already, sort of workshopping in my head, like, well, I wouldn't have done the plutonium thing. That seems dangerous. I would have built it with this instead. And you're immediately kind of playing that imagination game where you're thinking, where do you want to take a time machine? I think the other big thing is Back to the Future was probably one of the first movies I saw about time travel. And I think that's ultimately what I gravitated towards the most, is the concept of traveling through time, revisiting things, changing history for the better. And then the more and more I watched it, the more I fell in love with the characters and the parallels and that sort of bookending mirroring they do where they set up characters and they pay them off in such a satisfying way. And I fell in love with the dialogues and the humor and this sort of the love that everyone has for everything in that franchise.
Do you know what it was that inspired the writer Bob Gale? I mean, like what inspired the original idea?
I sure do. The origin for the concept, the great concept of Back to the Future, was apparently Bob Gale was flipping through his dad's high school yearbook, saw a picture of his dad, 30 years younger than he knew him, and he was like, "Wow, I've never seen my dad in this light before. I've never seen him in this context. I wonder if I went to high school with my own father, would I have been friends with him? Because he seems like a bit of a nerd." And that was sort of the origin for Back to the Future as a film, is when Marty goes back and he meets his dad, George. And George is kind of a putz. He's kind of a loser. And he's a pushover. And Marty is the absolute opposite. He's, a cool kid that can skateboard and play guitar and gets, I don't want to say all the ladies because he just has the one girlfriend for the entire trilogy, but he has the capability to charm women. And I love that conceit. Like, okay, would I have been friends with my dad? And for me, it was the opposite. I was the sort of dork movie nerd when my dad was like the popped collar, Harley driving cool kid when he went to high school in the 1970s. So if I had gone back 30 years, he would have been popular and I would have been like, oh yeah, okay, I'll be over here, sir. And I really like that dynamic. And Bob Gale clearly kind of leveraged that with a really cool concept is not only would I have been friends, what would that look like if I physically had to travel in time and then salvage his relationship and piece it back together with my mom, which is one of the all-time best ticking clocks and consequence-driven, I think, plot structures ever is. Your own existence will blip out if you don't get people to fall in love. It's a rom-com, it's sci-fi. It's such a perfect concept that I don't think any, maybe not any, but I don't think many movies have come close. Like Back to the Future for me is one of the all-time perfect screenplays.
Yeah, I think the idea of getting to hang out with your parents when you were the same age, like in high school, like that's really the thing that I love about it also. And then once you have that, all the time travel and so forth, like that's all just details, right?
Yeah, right. That's sort of the means to arrive at that destination. And it's funny, when I was a kid, and to the earlier question, that was what was interesting to me most, is the mechanics and logistics. The stuff with Doc and Marty in the parking lot was my favorite scene in the film, because it's like it's how do you physically handle the logistics of getting up to 88 miles an hour in a safe environment, and like what does that look like? How does it literally work? I want to see the machines and the gears and the switches. But then as an adult, I'm connecting way more with the stuff with George and Lorraine at the dance and at high school, where they're trying to fall in love, but they keep kind of getting blocked for one way or the other. And that's something that is interesting when I look back on my own life and my own relationship with the film, how dramatically that has shifted, that I've fallen in love with two very distinct aspects of it for very different reasons, but in equal measure that are such a fun, symbiotic kind of experience. And that's what the great films really do, is they do allow you, different ways to approach them.
They work on you.
Yeah, for sure.
To get under your skin. Yeah. I think I was more interested with the time travel part of it when I was a kid too. I think, if I remember right, I think Back to the Future was one of the VHS movies that McDonald's gave away for a while. Like you could buy the VHS of Back to the Future for like $6 along with your value meal.
Yeah.
So for some reason we did that back in 1994, I think it was. So that's how I would have been 9 or 10 by the time I saw it. And yeah, it was the time travel stuff that I thought was interesting, but I think it was the most recent time I watched it. Crispin Glover and Leah Thompson and Michael J. Fox, they were all so young and so beautiful together. It brought tears to my eyes just seeing them all when they were so young, and there was such like warmth and affection between the characters. I think of that scene when the three of them are together after the dance, and that's my favorite. That sums up the movie for me. When did you realize that your parents were real people and not just your parents?
Oh man, that is a deep question. That is a good question. When did I realize my parents were real people? I feel like probably not until I was like a teenager, and I started to kind of understand them through adolescence and through my own sort of burgeoning adulthood, that like, okay, these people had hopes and dreams. These people have flaws. They had things. They don't just like leave in the morning and go somewhere. They have a job that they're accomplishing, and they're doing it for me, and they're doing it to provide. And there is a point to their absence. They're not just leaving the house and coming back. They're doing something. And I think, yeah, probably around the time I started working for, not for a living, but working for extra money, around the time I was like 14 or 15. And I started to understand, like, oh, okay, I understand what a job is. I understand what work is now. I understand what my parents are doing, and I understand why they're doing it. And I think that sort of helped me contextualize a lot of what I was experiencing through them. But yeah, that's a tricky thing. I don't think I've ever given that thought before. That's a good question.
Really? Yeah, that's kind of for me, that's what the movie makes me think about.
Yeah. No, I can totally see that, which is why I think it's a great question. It's very related. If I may ask, when do you think you had that realization about your mother? When did you think you realized, oh, wow, she's a real, fully fledged human?
Well, I think my experience is a little different because my dad passed away when I was so young. So I think when that happens, when somebody passes away at a very impressionable age, it kind of makes them into a mythical figure almost.
Oh, for sure.
So like, I would say there are ways in which my dad seems more like an idea than a person sometimes. And it's taken me, I'm in my late 30s now, and it's taken me probably all of this time to try and understand that he was just a person too, because like when you try to live up in general, if you try to live up to your dad's example, it's really kind of impossible. But if your parents aren't even around for you to see their actual example, but it's become like more of an idea, right. I mean, it just can't be done. So I don't think that answers your question, but
no, it doesn't. And when you made me articulate mine, it made me consider, like, well, if I had to, looking over the totality of my adolescence and childhood, when did I come to that realization that my parents are sort of separate individuals with their own consciousness apart from just being my caregiver? I want to say that was like 13, 14, 15, and I wonder, is that old? Is it was I too slow to the uptake there? And if I am, that's not a big deal. It doesn't hurt my feelings any. But I am curious, like for most people, when does that realization set in? Because my 7-year-old is already asking some pretty pointed questions, sort of in that vein. That it's very interesting. She's always been very curious about her own existence and her namesake and where her mom and I met and all these things. And I wonder, but I don't remember asking those types of questions. I don't remember being curious about that sort of thing.
Do you think you would have been, like if you were in Marty's position, do you think you could have been friends with them? Knowing what you know about them, knowing what you know about yourself?
No, I don't think so. I think
interesting.
I mean, today, yes.
Yeah.
I am a much different and better person. But if I had gone back in time when I was 17 and met my parents when they were seniors in high school, no, I don't think so. I don't think we would have been particularly close. I think we moved in very different circles. Um, and my mother was, like I want to say she was a cheerleader, and then she was a flight attendant. She was like a cool kid. She was like, one of the hot blonde girls. And that was not who I hung out with in high school. I hung out with the theater kids and the video nerds. I didn't have a girlfriend in high school, and I'm certain both of my parents dated during that time. So, yeah, I feel like we would have been sort of aware of each other, but I don't think we would have been friends, or I don't think we would have hung out. And I wonder if that's normal, or again, if that's a cyclical thing where, the same reason in Marty's case and in Back to the Future, like he's such a different specimen and a different speed than his parents. Or I guess he's similar to his mom, but it is interesting that how they are as adults is almost a flip of how they were as kids and vice versa.
You know, when you're a kid up to a certain age, your parents are literally your whole world.
I as a parent now of a 5 and a 7, I'm very astutely aware of that dynamic. That they don't have a lot of friends outside of their core group of people they see at school, and they don't have any cousins, my kids, so it's just their 4 grandparents. And then us, so that's their family's very insular, very small, and their entire world is like 12 people. And when you grow up, that expands exponentially very quickly.
So are you still watching one movie a day at least?
I sure am.
Okay.
I almost said regretfully, but I don't regret it. I do enjoy it. It is not a chore. It is not a responsibility. It is something I look forward to. And I think again, this is the wrong word because it has a negative connotation, the roteness of this exercise of doing it every single night. I think that habit forces me to do things and forces me to watch things that I would be like, you know what, I'm not in the mood tonight. I'm uncomfortable. I don't want I like that it kind of forces me to do that. It's the same thing like exercise, right? It's the kind of thing you have to do it regularly for it to really make a difference. And I think watching movies very regularly and treating it less of a when I want to and I'll just put a movie on every single night. I'll put a movie on. I think it allows you to discover a lot of really cool things and revisit things you might not have remembered. Or maybe you've forgotten about. And yeah, no, I love that. I watch a movie every single night, have since the pandemic started almost 5 years ago now. So I've going on whatever that is, 1,700 straight days now. It's crazy.
That's amazing. So that makes it even more significant that this is the movie you've crowned as your number one favorite. So,
oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, I guess so. This is I call them, and you know this because we've talk all the time. I call them stupid epiphanies. And I had one of these very recently, like a year or two ago. I was 37, 38 years old. And it occurred to me, oh, you know what? Not everybody my age has seen 6,000 films. I am probably, if I had to guess, in the top 1 or 2%. I have seen more films. I haven't seen the most films. And I know plenty of people that have seen more movies than I have. But 6,000 is a lot. And it's more films than most people alive, and certainly more than like anybody our age under 40 has seen that kind of. Unless you're talking about these letterboxed junkies that are on, they're logging a film every single day or 2 times a day, and I'm okay with that. Like again, that's how I spend my free time. That's how I spend my nights, especially during these long New England winters when the sun goes down at 5 o'clock and there's nothing to do or go. I'll put on a movie or 2 every night. And after seeing whatever it is, 5,900 now, Back to the Future still stands at the very top of all of them. And whenever I rewatch it, I'm immediately reminded, oh yeah, no, this is pretty perfect. This is a flawless experience. And every time it warms my heart. It gets my blood racing. Like it's exciting. It's heartwarming. It makes me laugh. It makes me cry. It's a brilliant film. And it's a magic trick that it works every time.
How many times do you think you've seen it?
Not as many as you'd think. Less than 20, actually.
Really?
I want to say like 18 or 19 at this point.
Okay.
I try not to rewatch anything more than once a year. And I discovered Back to the Future maybe 30 years ago. And I don't think I watched it last November. I watched it the November before that. Yeah, I would say I probably watched it almost every year since 2000, plus or minus like 3 years. And of those 18 or 19, those are all confirmed logs. So when I was a kid, I probably watched it like another 5 or 10 times. So let's go with 30. I've seen it 30 times.
30 times.
That sounds about right.
Okay, yeah. That's not bad. So if you've sort of done this, but if you had to do it more succinctly, if you're going to describe what this movie is really about, what's going on under the surface, not necessarily using plot details, what's this movie about? What's the point of it?
That is another great question. Under the surface, I think it's about coming to terms with your purpose and finding your way. I think finding your identity, right? Marty's hero's journey is discovering himself and his purpose through the eyes of his parents and through their experience. And Doc Brown has his own sort of character arc where he's discovering his purpose is not just to be a failed scientist, but he now has a goal and an aim to strive towards. And that's building a time machine and, finding purpose in that and seeking out, new realities and new timelines. Because at the beginning of the movie, he seems perfectly fine with, getting murdered by the Libyans. Like he's almost like he came to terms with it.
Yeah.
And there's certainly a couple different reads of Back to the Future that suggest Doc was suicidal at the beginning because he willingly stands in front of a car going 88 miles an hour and he does not get out of the way. Now you could read that as he was fully confident it would completely work, but he also seems extremely surprised when it does. And my read of that has always been, this is a man that for 30 years has put every penny of his family fortune into this cockamamie idea. And if it works, great. But if it doesn't, he'd rather be dead. And it's a dark way to view that scene, but it makes sense. And when you picture it that way, it's like, wow, okay, Doc really goes through a bit of a catharsis and a bit of an evolution over the picture, because by the end of it, he puts on that bulletproof vest willingly because he does want to live and he does want to keep going. And Marty has given him something to hope for and something to aim towards.
So, Marty, I'm going to be very sad to see you go. You've really made a difference in my life. You've given me something to shoot for. Just knowing that I'm going to be around to see 1985, that I'm going to succeed in this, that I'm going to have a chance to travel through time. It's going to be really hard waiting 30 years before I can talk to you about everything that's happened in the past few days. I'm really going to miss you, Marty.
I'm really going to miss you.
Yeah, I guess that all the main characters in Back to the Future, it's their dreams that give them their purpose.
Correct. And I appreciate that. The movie has a very materialistic ending. It's a product of the mid 80s for sure. Marty gets back, and like the coolest thing is that he has a new truck in the driveway, and it's like, all right, that's more. There are things more important than a new 4x4. But I love that the movie has such an optimistic mentality. And that's probably a better and more succinct answer to the question you asked me earlier, which is, what is the point? What is the thesis of the film? The thesis is your future is whatever you make it. And I love that. That's a sentimentality we need to have. I need to have. I am a deeply optimistic and sentimental person. And I think anything that's cynical, I reject outright, and I don't like it. So when a movie gives me hope and it gives me reason to be optimistic, that's the stuff that I really love. And that's the stuff I come back to the most.
Thank you for listening to Why This Movie. If you have a movie that you love that you'd like to talk about, email me at christopherallenmaloney@gmail.com, and you may be featured on an upcoming show.